Hello, it's Stacy with Bridges 527. I want to take just a few minutes and talk about Amsterdam. I'm not going to really go into the whole movie, but I'm going to talk about two kind of tangential statements that they made that I think are pretty integral to the movie, but actually really to our lives as well. The first is that there's a theme about bird watching, and they talk about particularly this cuckoo is a parasitic bird, and it's not smart, and it steals other people's nests because it can't create its own and whatever. And this whole thing becomes a metaphor for the movie and different people and how they act in the movie. However, what I actually want to focus on is not the cuckoo, but the idea of bird watching itself. And they make a statement that bird watching forces you to decide what you were looking at. And I think that is a huge, it's a basic statement that's extremely true. And then I want to take it a little deeper, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Because it's really about perspective. Like, all of life is about perspective. And the New Age movements and lots of religious movements are all kind of capitalizing on this idea that, you know, what you see and what you focus on, like, you can empower it in your life. You see more of it. If you know, my dad always used illustration. If somebody paid you $1,000 to tell them how many white Ford trucks you saw at the end of the day, you'd pay attention. You may not ever notice how many white Ford trucks are out there, but if you were getting money for everyone, all of a sudden you'd see them everywhere, and you wouldn't miss one because you'd be looking for it. So we find what we're looking for. So if you are looking for the goodness of God, you're going to find it in your life. You're going to see all the ways He's blessed you. If you want to believe that people are kind, you're going to see all these all the evidence for that in your life. But if you believe that everybody's against you and they're negative, like, you're going to see that too. You're going to twist the things that you see to fit the narrative in your head. And then because you believe no one likes you, you're going to be nasty to people, and then they're going to be nasty back, and then you're proving yourself correct. So all these things it's both and, right? You see what you're looking for. You also will take the things that could be interpreted one way or the other, and you'll interpret it with your bias. And then your bias will create agreements in your head and expectations that actually become self-fulfilling prophecies. So it's like a three-way kind of a thing where it multiplies, positive or negative, whatever you're looking for. So I love this idea about bird watching forces you to decide what you're looking at, because here's the thing. So many times we don't realize that we're making choices about what we're looking for. Bird watching, photography, telling stories, there's a lot of different things that actually really force you to think about, what is it I'm going to tell? What's the story? What are the things that I'm going to focus on? Because this is key. But a lot of us go through life without making a decision about what we're going to look at. We aren't forced to decide what we're looking for, what we're looking at. So I loved that kind of idea that sometimes it's good to put ourselves in a perspective where we're actually forced to make that choice, and we're aware of it. So that was an interesting kind of revelation, I would say, and challenge to think differently about what it is that we're looking at, and to make conscious choices for what we're going to focus on and look for in our lives. But kind of in that vein, they start the whole movie in this kind of crazy situation, and then they pause it and they're like, okay, no one gets here without things starting a long time ago. So the whole movie is really a flashback building up to how did we get to this point, and it's understanding the things that brought them to that place. And I think, again, this is about understanding what it is that we're looking at. So they tell us this crazy story, and you don't always understand why they're telling it or whatever, but it all is about understanding what you're looking at in the future by understanding where you came from and how they got there. And so I think this idea of origin stories is critical, and I think we probably don't understand enough how important that is. This is why the Bible is quick to provide stories of origins. Like, right, Genesis, you have the story of the earth, you have Jesus and the kind of beginning of the Christian movement in that way, with Christ on the earth. You have stories about, like, the twins who were born, Jacob and Esau, and how they were in the womb, and how that origin story of theirs completely affected their entire relationship. It was a marker for their lives. The origin of the Israeli people and the conflict in the Middle East that we still have today goes back to Jacob and Esau, like all of these things. So the Bible gives us origin stories that help us understand how we got here. and also how to get beyond here and how to grow past that. So the origin story thing I think is just super fascinating, and the older I get and the more I look at these things, the more I realize like origin stories are everything. Understanding how people got their names, actually really insightful as to who they are. So there's just a lot of things there that I think this movie kind of pointed to. Again, I'm going to say origin stories and the importance of them, and how we will never understand our lives if we don't understand where we came from. That's it. It's a key thing. But part of that is choosing what you look at when you look back over your origin story. And let me end with Joseph, who, and I just love this story, but when God gave him a promise, his brothers hated him, came against him, all these things, all these tragedies happened in his life. But then his life is finally redeemed. He gets all the promises that God planned for him, and he's talking to his brothers, and he doesn't deny at all what happened. He's like, no, you meant to harm me. But he points out that how can I not forgive you? Because I understand that God used all of those things to get me to where I am today and to save all these lives. And so I would say this fits into both of these points. One, he understands his origin story. He totally understands where he came from and how he got to where he was. But he's able to look at it and choose to look at it through the eyes of God's grace and God's ability to transform all things for good. So instead of looking at it and seeing all the hurt and misery that his brothers caused, he looks back and chooses to focus on the hand, like God's storyline in all of that and how God worked through all of those things. So he could look back on his origin story with the perspective of the horrors that happened or the way God worked. Both are looking at his origin story, but the bird watching thing is important because he has chosen how to look at his origin story and what lessons to pull from it. So I think that kind of actually ties all this together fairly well. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thanks again for listening. Stacy with Bridges 52.7, and just encouraging everyone to dig deep, reach wide, and connect your life to Christ.